Most people drink coffee every day without a second thought. Yet few know that it's one of the top drivers of global deforestation and ocean pollution. Etelle Higonnet, a human rights lawyer turned environmental activist, discovered that coffee is tied not only to deforestation, but also to slavery, toxic chemical use, and the degradation of critical marine ecosystems. After years of investigating abuses in cocoa, rubber, and seafood industries, Etelle founded Coffee Watch to expose how the coffee supply chain harms both people and the planet. Her research revealed that many certified ethical coffee brands still fall short, failing to ensure living wages, environmental protection, or even traceability, with some linked to modern slavery. In today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast, Etelle shares how you can make simple, powerful changes in your daily coffee habits to protect rainforests, defend human rights, and safeguard our oceans. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening in the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And today we're talking about coffee, and you're probably wondering, Andrew, why are we talking about coffee? You don't even drink coffee, and that is true. I do not drink coffee. Not that I don't like coffee. I don't think I've ever actually tried coffee to the point where I'm like giving it a really good shake. I am actually just not a coffee drinker. There's no worries of me ever drinking coffee. I have no urge to drink coffee, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, and I have nothing against people who drink coffee. I actually enjoy the smell of coffee. My wife has coffee, and it smells great in the house when she does have that. But it's really difficult to know if you're drinking coffee that's actually good for the planet, for people who are growing it and so forth, just like seafood. So I wanted to have someone on the podcast to talk about how to choose the proper coffee and how to go forward and make sure that you can drink conscious-free coffee to make sure you can get through your day. So I had Etelle Higonnet on the podcast today. She is the founder and executive director of Coffee Watch, where they look at all things coffee related and looking at the entire supply chain and finding out what is good and what is bad and oftentimes terrible within this industry and how we can make it better. So she's going to talk about her journey from human rights lawyer in conflict areas like war zones that have to deal with torture and so forth, all the way to the coffee industry and how that's kind of related from a human rights perspective. We're going to talk a lot about that. We're going to talk about the coffee industry. We're going to talk about how some of the major corporations can have a huge difference, just like they did in the seafood industry, and how we can find more ways to live sustainably just by drinking a cup of coffee. It's going to be a great show. Before we get into the interview, though, I would like to say if you want to find out more ways that you can be guided towards living for a better planet and a better ocean, you can do so by joining the Undertow. That's going to speakupforblue.com/join the Undertow. That's speakupforblue.com/join the Undertow, all one word. So you can join our community of action where we guide you to make better choices, not only from a knowledge standpoint and learn about the ocean, but say, hey, how do we buy the right coffee? How do we buy the right seafood? How do we make sure that we're drinking out of the right containers and so forth, and making sure we're making healthy choices, not only for us, but for our planet and for our ocean? Go to speakupforblue.com/join the Undertow. Here's the interview with Etelle Higonnet from Coffee Watch, learning all about coffee and how to make better choices for a better planet. Enjoy the interview, and I will talk to you after. Hey, Etelle, welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about all things coffee and the environment?
I'm so excited to be here.
Nice. I'm very excited too. This is something that's very new to me. I'm not a coffee drinker, full disclosure, but I know so many people who drink coffee, including everybody else in my household, except for my dogs. And even I feel like my dogs would drink it if it was on the ground. So, let's just put that out there. But I know like coffee is such a huge part of everybody's life. You hear people say, I can't function without my coffee. There's t-shirts like, but coffee, they all have these types of signs and everybody loves their coffee. But when you think about where coffee comes from, how it's made, how it's farmed, who farms it, what the process is, how it affects the environment, there are a lot of things that go into it that we are not really told about or aware of in terms of what happens within the coffee industry. And are we drinking coffee that is, one, sustainable, actually free trade? You hear people talk about free trade coffee. So we're going to get into all these different questions and really dispel some of the myths and really understand how the coffee industry works in 2025 and what we can do as people who drink coffee can do to make it better and just have a better conscience when they're actually buying coffee and making sure they're making the right decisions. So without hopefully interfering with their lives too much or paying out the wazoo for coffee, right? So we're going to get into all that. But before we do, Etelle, why don't you let us know who you are and what you do?
Sure. Well, it's such a pleasure to be here on your show. I'm a human rights and environmental activist and lawyer. You can probably tell from my name. I'm French American, but I went to the United States for university and for law school at Yale, and worked a little bit into war crimes tribunals, and that sort of set me on this trajectory of trying to combat crimes against humanity. So after the war crimes courts in Sierra Leone and in Cambodia, I worked with Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, mostly in war zones and post-conflict areas, and the International Human Rights Law Institute. So the first 12 years of my life were dominated by a somewhat grim reality of documenting really awful things that people do to one another, like rape and torture and killings. But I'm actually a very positive, glass half full kind of person. I know that sounds crazy. And I do believe fundamentally in the goodness of humanity. And I had this moment where I realized that one reason there's so many wars and conflicts is because, we're entering an era of climate chaos, and it's already turbocharging and deepening conflicts and making conflicts appear where none were before and making them worse when they're...
Interesting.
And so I decided to go work at Greenpeace and combat climate change as best I could. And I ended up as research director for Greenpeace in Southeast Asia, working a lot on oceans and actually trying to combat seafood slavery as well as overfishing, but also doing a lot on deforestation and other environmental issues. And that sort of, it just ignited this passion in me to both defend the environment and human rights. And when I was at Greenpeace, and then also this other organization I worked in, it's called Mighty Earth. I guess you could maybe describe it as a spin-off of Greenpeace. One thing that I had wanted to do was to work on all the top 7 drivers of global deforestation. And at Greenpeace, we did an amazing job on the big 4, palm oil, pulp and paper, cattle, soy, but we never really were able to tackle cocoa, coffee, and rubber. So at Mighty Earth, I started these cocoa and rubber campaigns that were awesome. And we won so many of our campaigns and really helped to transform a lot of things in those industries, which are not great by any means. But this really amazing journey towards rapid change in rubber and cocoa that I sort of figured out all the best things that we had done at Greenpeace for palm oil and brought it into cocoa and rubber. Along with the best things that I remembered from Amnesty and Human Rights Watch days. And it just taught me that you can transform really destructive industries. So after taking 2 years off with my beautiful baby boy, I thought, I got knighted. What should I do with this knighthood? I'm going to try to now turn to the last of the big 7 drivers of deforestation that gets almost no attention, which is coffee. Nobody works on it. Not Greenpeace, not Mighty Earth, not Amnesty, not Human Rights Watch. Just decided this orphan subject, and yet it's the number 6 driver of global deforestation, and it's powering ocean destruction, slavery, and child labor. And I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to use my knighthood for. I'm going to try to change the coffee industry if I can. So that's where we are now. I guess you could best describe Coffee Watch. It's like if Amnesty and Greenpeace got together and had a baby, and that baby just wanted to work on coffee.
Well, I think it's really important too, and we'll get into this more as the interview progresses, because I want to really start to get your mindset of when you started off in your first, even before you started your career and get into your schooling, your thought process of what you want to do when, like, growing up and how it related to coffee or even just human rights and everything. But it's interesting how, we look at the top 10 of what the top 10 drivers of deforestation. Coffee is one of them, but there isn't much information on how it's destructive or even movement on that. And, even organizations like Greenpeace and Amnesty International and all the WWF, all these other organizations that are so massive, they focus on specific aspects of deforestation. But it's funny how coffee is kind of slipped aside, and not many people are working on it. If it's more than one, as opposed to a coffee watch, it'd be interesting to hear that. But let's go. But I kind of want to go back a little bit in time, and you've mentioned that you've covered some pretty emotionally and mentally draining, and I'm sure physically as well, but an intense cases and work experience. When you were studying, even before, when you were, a teenager, did you always have that drive to, like that, I guess it's a bit of a political, but also human rights drive to stick up for the person or the people who couldn't defend themselves or who went through a hardship?
Always. And
Yeah.
the funny thing is, Andrew, I think most of us start out that way. But somehow life crushes a lot of people along the path. But yeah, ever since I was young, I knew the world was not quite right. All this injustice and poverty and human rights abuses. I think many people know that the world is not quite right.
Yeah, for sure.
But somehow my family and friends gave me this weird, wild, crazy idea that I could change that, try to make the world a better place. So I think I'm very lucky that I got that memo, especially one of my professors.
Mm-hmm.
I was an undergrad named Greg Grandin. He just changed my world. And another professor, Ben Kiernan. They're both just the most amazing mentors. And yeah, I will be eternally grateful to them for teaching me that, every time you see something wrong, you can always do something about it.
And that's a very difficult thing it's easy to tell a child or to tell a student, an undergraduate student, to say, hey, look, we need to stand up for what's wrong in this world. There are a lot of things wrong with this world, and we need to stand up. But a lot of people don't want to. It takes a lot of bravery, it takes a lot of courage to stand up for something and speak out against something. You can speak out about anything these days and get criticism, and a lot of people are worried about the criticism that they get. They don't want to, take too much of a controversial stance, or they don't want to go opposite of what the main purpose of, or the main sort of thought process of a specific issue, even as an example, obviously we're not going to discuss it, but like what's happening in Gaza and in Israel, it's a very difficult issue, even just to have a conversation with, within your household or within a context of a public setting, because everybody's there are a lot of people who are so divided but want to see a solution in some sort of capacity. As a child, it's like, I've got two teenage girls at home, and it's like, sometimes you want them to stand up for something, and you want them to stand up for what's right, and then there are sometimes consequences to that. Was there anything in your whether you were in high school or undergraduate level, like a specific moment that you kind of remember standing up for something that you may not have had to, but you felt it was really important to say, hey, you know what, like, this is wrong, and we really need to be able to tackle this or be able to discuss this particular issue?
Something that really motivated me when I was younger, when I was a teenager, I found out that my grandfather, Grandpapa, had done small things with the French resistance.
Okay.
And he was not a big hero.
Yeah, right.
He was an engineer, and he apparently, according to one of my uncles, who's also a very, very talented math science brain, Grandpapa made microfiches of papers for the resistance. And the microfiche, you can roll them up very small compartments and put them in like a cigarette case or a matchbox or a cylinder of a bicycle. And, the fact that my grandfather did something that was so small and niche, but so important and so courageous, and just that he was like this tiny little cog in a really big machine. I mean, not that the French resistance was big enough; it should have been bigger.
Well, this is during World War II. They're under attack. It
was not easy to be in the resistance, and yet we wish that the resistance had been bigger. But just knowing that you don't have to be a super mega
Right.
hero. Grand-papa was not like Charles de Gaulle.
Right.
Grand-papa
Right.
was just a father of 3 kids who was an engineer and made his little microfiche when he could for these resistance guys. And, it was an act of courage. It was probably really hard for him. And I'm sure really scary for my grandmother if she found
For
out.
sure.
But, every little thing matters. And I think knowing that you don't have to be a hero, you don't have to save the world. All you have to do is just do the best you can in the
Yeah.
moment with the time that you have and the abilities that you have. Just this moment. Just do the best. I think that's kind of what set me on my path in a way.
I love that story because, I mean, if you think about that age of La Résistance and World War II, he could have been killed for that, for, creating those microfiches for all we know. You never know. He may have helped even one or two people to get to safety or, get further ahead in what they were trying to do. I think that's a very important fact to realize. We don't all have to have our names in the history books to make a difference. And sometimes small changes or making those little voices, can matter to a couple of people that could change something else, that could change the world, that could change anything. You never know what's going to happen. Right? You just never know. Now, with that type of mindset, having that history and knowing of that history, going into law, a lot of people will go into. I don't think I've ever had friends of mine go into law that wasn't like corporate law. It was all business. It's usually business focused. I feel like that's a popular thing to go into because it's stable. It's you can make pretty good money out of it. And then there are some that go into environmental law and human rights law, but not often. So what was it for you when you were choosing that? Like, tell me the process of like choosing it and why you would choose to follow human rights law, if that's what it was, or if it was a different type of law.
I think most people don't want to go into human rights and environmental law because it's sort of a life of penury.
For sure, yeah.
You can make so much money working for a law firm. But, even people who do go into law firms will often take on pro bono cases and do amazingly good things for the world that way. So I don't feel like it's an either or situation. But for me, I did once work at a corporate law firm for 8 weeks. And then that was it. It was just enough money so that I could go work in the war crimes court that I wanted to. It basically paid me almost nothing.
Yeah.
So, I did that very, very briefly. Sullivan and Cromwell. It was a weird side moment in my life. But I just always knew that I wanted to do human rights and environmental work, especially human rights work when I was younger. That was just... like not even a doubt in my mind because I just thought to myself, Andrew, why is it that there are these people who are just like me? Literally, there's like no difference. If they had been born in my shoes, they would be the ones going to Yale Law School. Why is it that these people are earning under $2 a day, are being raped, are being tortured? This it's so unfair. I just don't want to live in a world with that level of unfairness without trying to do something about it.
Yeah, but it's a heavy toll to take on those cases, to work on those cases.
Definitely.
Yeah,
I remember
huge.
when I worked in Iraq, I kind of stopped sleeping, and also when I worked in this civil war in West Africa, my hair started falling out and I lost like 5 kilos. It was not a healthy time. Definitely, it's hard sometimes to do this kind of work. It's true.
What allows you to survive those times, like mentally and emotionally?
That's so easy. Love. Just
right.
Love. I have such wonderful friends and family. My husband is the best husband in the whole world. It's like my whole support team rolled into one magic person. If you could have like queer eye for the straight guy, he's like Brazilian eye for Etelle.
And you said he works for the United Nations as well, right?
He does.
Yeah. Okay. So he works for the United Nations. So he's, obviously is it the same line of work, like human rights or... just helping out different countries. Like I know I have a friend who works in this type of work, and he's been in Syria and like some pretty heavy places, like civil war places that could be pretty dangerous.
So it's connected, but my husband works in public health. He's a public health hero.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And
Good.
so,
Good.
if you think about how this is all interconnected, Andrew, we're deforesting the world at a rapid clip.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that I've worked on at Greenpeace and Mighty Earth and now Coffee Watch. But when we deforest, not only does it knock all our rainfall off kilter,
Mm-hmm.
turbocharges climate change. Most people don't know this, but a third of climate change is from agriculture.
Right.
Um, it does crazy stuff to our oceans. It does crazy stuff to our whole planet. But it also means that we're going further and further into the heart of where wildlife used to have safe habitats without contact with humans. And so the closer we go into these wild areas, the more we get exposed to new novel pathogens.
Mm-hmm.
And the more we have factory farms, which is the other thing that I worked on a lot at Greenpeace and Mighty Earth, these terrible factory farms where you squeeze lots of animals together in
Mm-hmm.
really dirty, filthy, unhygienic, horrible conditions. That's basically torture
Yeah.
before we kill them. And which also, by the way, is terrible for oceans because all their poop just
Yep.
goes straight into the ocean and creates these enormous dead zones. That same CAFO system, these concentrated farming operations, also is like a petri dish for bird flu and swine flu and crazy diseases. And so, in a way, the environmental stuff that I work on is also rolling the dice. These horrible crimes of deforestation, factory farming, the way we do it now, it rolls the dice for these spectacular diseases like COVID, like
Mm-hmm.
HIV,
Mm-hmm.
like bird flu, like swine flu. And then you have these heroes like my husband who are trying to pick up the pieces and save everyone and vaccinate people and get the
Yeah.
medicine and the tests out all over to stop us from all dying in large numbers. Essentially, they're doing the mop-up operations to compensate for corporations' totally irresponsible behavior that activists like myself have not been able to curb or stop. So in a way, I
Or
think
hold them accountable for, right?
or
Like
hold
that's
them
a
accountable. So I think my
yeah.
husband is connected to my work. He's
Yep.
like the emergency mop-up guys that come and try to save humanity when we've made ourselves sick by killing our
Yeah.
planet.
That I mean, it's great to be able to work with somebody like that, or to live with somebody who works in such an interesting field like that, as you do as well. Now, you work in this. You mentioned you work in this heavy, intense sort of field of human rights, looking at war crimes and people being tortured and so forth. And then you start moving a little bit more environmental. It's a switch. I can see the switch because a lot of the environmental and conservation needs and issues that we're facing, a lot of them are human rights. There are human rights violations, fishery slaves, as you mentioned when you worked in Asia. There's fishery slaves, as we talked about on this podcast before, and so was that the sort of the general move as you started to look at human rights? These files would start to come up where you work at Greenpeace and you're like, okay, let's start looking at these different aspects of conservation issues and how they relate to human rights.
Yeah, Andrew, this is such a deep and good question. I think that human rights and environmental problems often tend to be the two sides of the exact same coin.
Mm.
So one of the most fascinating things that we found out when I was at Greenpeace, when I was our Southeast Asia research director, was that all these vessels that were the most implicated in IUU fishing,
Yep.
in pirate fishing and overfishing and fishing juveniles and fishing out of season, fishing in marine protected areas, basically the vessels that are trashing the ocean, disproportionately, they also had some of the worst human rights violations.
Mm-hmm.
They were just floating prisons.
Hmm.
And not just with seafood slaves, but in order to keep people in that level of servitude, they would deploy immense amounts of violence, torture, killings, threats, confiscating people's papers,
Right.
and beating them. But I remember I was working in Bangkok with the oceans team there, and my flatmate was this fantastic reporter for The Guardian who broke open this landmark first ever expose of seafood slavery. The Guardian is like at the heart of that, and then after The
Yeah.
Guardian. being at the New York Times did some work, and AP did some fantastic work, and then it sort of spread. But I remember when I would come back to work from home from talking with my flatmate, Kate, this wonderful journalist, Kate. I wish she could have gotten like every medal for best journalism in the world. I would go to the office after talking to Kate. I'd be like, guys, we have got to do more about human rights abuses in the high seas and in all these ports, because the penalties for the environmental stuff are so low, but the penalties for the human rights abuses are higher, and these vessels are the same. Let's start working on this in a holistic way. And I remember it was very similar. The deforestation problems for palm oil and pulp and paper, they often went, of course, they're terrible for the environment. It's a carbon catastrophe. It's a biodiversity catastrophe. I have a beautiful picture of an orangutan mother and baby up on the wall behind me. It's like the number one killer of orangutans is palm oil and pulp and paper. It's, they set these huge raging forest fires that you can see from outer space. The smoke travels to China to the point where the Chinese complain to the Indonesian authorities about if China's calling you to complain about
air quality,
you're doing something very wrong.
Seriously.
But it's not just a carbon bomb and an air pollution problem of airpocalypse now. It's not just killing orangutans and driving immense biodiversity loss. Also, these fires and this deforestation and peat draining, it harmed so many indigenous communities and forest-dependent communities. And then, as they would resist, people would be violently mistreated, threatened. We could see that the human rights problems would go hand in hand with the deforestation on land as they do at sea. So I believe that, it's the two sides of the same coin. And I see it again now in coffee, where you've got kids and slaves and forced labor and extreme poverty on the social side. And then on the environmental side, deforestation, horrible overuse of chemicals, often HHPs, highly hazardous chemicals. Where do you think they go? The ocean and our bodies and our rivers. And not just that, but plastics from cups and pods, and not just deforestation and plastics and misuse of water and chemicals, but also we're doing things in monocultures that should be beautiful, regenerative agroforestry. So with coffee, as with what I saw when I was at Greenpeace and Mighty Earth, environmental and human rights stuff go hand in hand. If you want to fix the planet, you got to do it in this holistic way.
Now you're trying to help out an entire industry, not just the farmers, not just the people who are affected by this, not just the environment, even the industry, the people who are making profits off of this. Let's make profit, but let's do it properly. You identify this happening, looking at deforestation through your work, and you see coffee. Okay, the coffee industry, who is doing what about it? You're probably looking around and being like, what is being done? You find one paper that was written in 2007 by WWF, as you mentioned before we recorded, and talking about how deforestation in the coffee industry is a huge problem. Not many people are covering this. When did you start to discover this problem, and then when did that turn into the idea and sort of the brainchild of Coffee Watch?
So this is a great question. When I was working at Greenpeace, I already knew that coffee was the number 6 driver of deforestation.
Okay.
And a lot of NGOs, Greenpeace, WWF, Amnesty, so many NGOs got together and pushed with a lot of parliamentarians to pass this law in the European Union called the EU Deforestation Regulation to bar all of the top 7 drivers of deforestation from entering the EU. Makes sense. You could think of it as like the 7 deadly sins for forests.
Right.
And Greenpeace works a lot on the big 4, but the numbers 5, 6, and 7 got really short shrift. So when I went to Mighty Earth after Greenpeace, I worked a lot on cocoa and rubber, which are numbers 5 and 7 of global deforestation. Right. But it was just niggling me and niggling me and niggling me. I wanted to work on coffee. All these scientists kept saying it's the number 6 driver, but then there's no NGOs working on it really. And then I came across one paper, which blew my mind. The WWF had investigated how coffee was threatening tiger habitat in an Indonesian park. Elephant, tiger, and rhino habitat. It's one of the world's most important national parks. And coffee was driving deforestation there. I was like, what is going on? And then I started digging deeper, and I realized, oh my God, this is a problem of really
Yeah.
epic proportions. I mean, it's not one of the big four, but it's one of the 7 deadly worst commodities for wars. Nobody is working on it, really. WWF did that one beautiful thing, and then they never did anything again on coffee and forests. So I decided to start Coffee Watch at that time. And then I realized, wow, it's driving deforestation in all the forest frontiers, in Cameroon, in the whole Great Lakes region, in chimpanzee habitat, bonobo, gorilla habitat. Andrew, these are our closest cousins.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
one day I was at the beach with my wonderful husband, and I just looked at all these stupid effing coffee cups.
Mm-hmm.
It was a beautiful beach, and I just thought, I hate my life. I started picking up all the coffee cups. And it felt like such an act of futility.
Right,
And
because there's so
then
many of them.
as I was going through this garbage picking up episode in Thailand, just sort of like rage cleaning the beach, I thought, wow, it's not just deforestation, it's plastics.
Mm.
And it wasn't until much later, Andrew, that I processed how many chemicals the coffee industry is using and how much it relies on monoculture. So I think my resolve just kept deepening and deepening with every discovery. Yeah.
Well, and it seems like it was hitting all the bad parts of affecting the environment at every point in the supply chain. So you from the production, like growing, to the production aspect, to the retail aspect, and then to the consumer aspect. It was hitting everything, not only from deforestation, but looking at lack of biodiversity with the monocultures, the use of pesticides and chemicals to grow the coffee, the packaging to sell the coffee. Then you got, the packaging to sell and consume the coffee, and then it goes into the environment, whether it be on land or at sea or in a river or all of the above.
Yes.
It must have been devastating for you to, as you start to realize where this is at, and you're one person or a few people who are starting to recognize this and be aware of this, even though this has been happening for a while. Not many people were working on these types of problems. Maybe as a larger aspect, because we've known coffee cups. I know here in Canada, we've known coffee cups have been a problem, out, when you see them over, like people throw them out, but they don't always make it to the trash. You'll see them on the streets sometimes. You'll see them in the lakes here, and sometimes, and obviously not good in a lot of that way. But when it's kind of interesting when you think of coffee itself. Like I'm not a coffee drinker, but I don't know anybody who's like, oh, it's so bad that I'm drinking coffee. It's so bad for the environment that I'm
No.
like you'll see that with like pop or soda,
Hello.
right? And
Yeah.
you'll see that with alcohol, because alcohol has its known effects.
Yeah.
But with coffee, it's like every time someone's drinking, it's like a relief. It's like you're getting that caffeine hit. If you drink coffee, like there are studies that show that it's healthy for you if you drink it in moderation. And when you think about the production and the sale, I guess from this is very anecdotal. I always think of people buying it fair trade. I always think about people buying it where the agriculture aspect, the farmers benefiting because it's part of this fair trade, fair use type of system. And most people want that because that tends to be the better coffee anyway. It's a lot of people are using their coffee like they drink their wine. It's got to be unique. They want to taste everything about it, all the way from grinding it all down and then drinking it. Why is there such this disparity of information of everything I talked about in terms of the creation and the production of this to the selling to the consumer, not really realizing the amount of problems that are occurring, not just because of one individual doing it, but because of the whole industry supplying these individuals with, great coffee?
Andrew, I think that there has been a giant consumer fraud perpetrated on coffee drinkers, both by the industry and by certification schemes, actually. I
Interesting.
was shocked when
Yeah.
I started Coffee Watch and I started digging into the certification schemes to discover that there is not a single certification scheme, not one, that guarantees a living income price for
Huh.
coffee farmers or a living income wage for farm workers. There are 25 million coffee farmers in the world and 100 million farm workers, give or take. So if you add in their dependents, there's like several kids, right, per farmer and farm worker. We're talking about well north of 200 million people, almost all of whom live in poverty, most of whom live in extreme poverty
Right.
because of coffee.
Right.
And actually, the certification schemes are not fixing it. Most of the certification schemes do not require that you be chemical free, like organic. And to my knowledge, the certification schemes do not force the companies whose coffee they certify to deal with packaging in an appropriate fashion, even though we know that there are an estimated 500 billion disposable cups used annually, many of which are for coffee.
Yeah.
That's billion with a B, with a B. And even though we also know that we think there are hundreds of millions of pods,
Yeah.
capsules,
Oh, yeah.
none of which are compostable and recyclable, being appropriately disposed of. I mean, unless you think disposing of it in our ocean is appropriate. And most certifications don't really require the coffee to be grown in a serious agroforestry system, right? There's a difference between monoculture and agroforestry,
Okay.
right? And if you're going to have a chemical-free agroforestry system that's like a regenerative system with lots of trees mixed in with the coffee, you want multiple different canopy heights, you want to have native species and not invasives, you want it to be bird friendly and bat friendly and butterfly friendly. And if you do agroforestry coffee, it's got 19 times more biodiversity and double the carbon. It anchors rainfall. It's not a poison machine. It means you're just taking pressure off the oceans. Why is it that the certification schemes don't require coffee to treat its effluents? The coffee industry just dumps effluents straight into rivers. That's it. There's like a handful of companies that treat their effluents. Not even
Right.
100%. The ones that do are like, I treat 80% of the effluents.
Yeah,
Like,
that's like
oh my God,
that's a
that's the
flex.
B minus. So when you think about how like half of global coffee is certified,
Yeah.
but the certification schemes do not pay a living income price, do not deal with packaging to stop everything from winding up in our oceans or horrible landfills, do not deal with chemical overuse and misuse and effluent treatment, do not require really good, robust agroforestry systems that work for carbon, for biodiversity, for farmer food security, for farmer income diversification. You realize it's like this giant consumer fraud. That's why
Huge.
most perfectly nice people think they're drinking something good and they're doing their best, and then they'd be shocked to learn what it really is doing.
It's unreal how they can get away with putting these certifications together. Now, I get, when you initially put a certification together, it may not be the best. It may not be the best version of itself. Like when I first started my podcast, my first episode sucked, like compared to how I feel about it now, 1,700 or almost 1,800 episodes later. When you put a certification in place of an industry that's probably not very well regulated because it's working in so many different countries, especially in countries where regulation is probably not the focus in developing countries and so forth, and you can get away with paying people at a very, very, very low wage, if a livable wage at all. As you mentioned, many of them are underneath. And so I can understand when you first put a certification in and it doesn't really meet the best standards for the industry, for the people growing it. You would expect that it would be improved over time, and that people would, the people who call it out and say, hey, you know what, it's not that I want this to go away, is I want this to get better, and I want to work with you to get better. So from a Coffee Watch standpoint, your organization, when you look at certifications like this, do you approach the certification companies or the third-party bodies who manage these certification organizations and then say, let's, this is underserving. You're not serving the community well. How can we make this better? Do you end up, putting a little bit of pressure on them from an activism standpoint, but also we want to work with you to increase these certifications and make them better?
I absolutely believe that the certifications could do better and should do better. And my dream world is one where I wake up tomorrow or the day after your podcast comes out and all of the main certifications in coffee have said, oh, wow, we're going to pay living income price and stop dumping hazardous chemicals on coffee and treat all of our effluents and make sure that all the coffee is packaged in compostable and recyclable materials. And like, where's the no deforestation pledge for me to sign?
Yeah, exactly.
That's my dream. Sadly, we're not there yet. I certainly have tried communicating with a number of the coffee certification schemes, as have other organizations. And just recently, Coffee Watch worked with Repórter Brasil, which is a Brazilian organization that's won many, many awards, and their director just won the Goldman Award recently, which is like the Green Nobel Prize, I guess you could say. And we worked with this other NGO in Colombia as well to do an investigation of coffee in Colombia. Literally, we found abuses in the certification schemes of Fairtrade, of Rainforest Alliance, of 4C, which is like one of the biggest in coffee.
Yeah.
Mostly for Nestlé, and cafe practices, which is like 100% for Starbucks. We just did that report, but already Coffee Watch's first report on abuses that we found in Chinese coffee supply chains, a lot of that was certified. Did another report on abuses in Mexican coffee supply chains. A lot of that was certified. Cafe practices, like, is almost all of Starbucks coffee is certified by this thing called Cafe Practices, which was set up by Conservation International. I'm sure you know of them. They do a lot of ocean work, so you've probably come across them.
Yeah.
Well, they certify Starbucks coffee, and not only do they certify all the environmental abuses we were talking about, we also filed a strategic litigation against coffee companies in the United States. We filed against Starbucks, Nestlé, Dunkin' Donuts, McDonald's, and a couple others for slavery in their coffee. Wow. And some of that was certified coffee. So just to give you a sense of like how bad it is, the Brazilian Labor Inspection Department found 3,700 slaves in coffee plantations between 1996 and 2003. And that's even though they've only inspected 0.1% of coffee farms.
Yeah, so they're just literally scratching the surface.
So they're just scratching the surface. So we are talking about certified slavery, as well as certified deforestation and forced labor and child labor and hazardous chemical use.
Well, it's really interesting because you're talking about these major companies, like these major corporations, Starbucks, McDonald's, and so forth. And, I know with the seafood industry, to use this as an analogy, one of the biggest problems with the seafood industry is not knowing the supply chain from catching all the way up to the final retail. And Oceana made some interesting discoveries, scary discoveries really, whereas like a lot of the seafood that was sold in seafood markets a number of years ago, I think it was just around 2018, 2019, 50% of them were not the seafood that they were selling at. And it wasn't necessarily the markets that knew about it. It was the fact that they, throughout the supply chain, things changed and they didn't know how it changed. So it wasn't being certified. So you have, MSC, the Marine Stewardship Council, who have come out and they said that we've actually been able to inspect and we follow, I think it was over 400 different supply chains. I know they sometimes identify problems even still within that, but at least they know where this fish is coming from and where the seafood's coming from. Was that the problem when you started bringing lawsuits against these corporations? Is they just didn't know or didn't have control over the entire supply chain going from the grow up to the final sale at a McDonald's or at a Starbucks or wherever? Was that the actual problem?
Do you know those little three monkeys that everyone has on their desk that says like "See no evil, hear no
Yes.
evil, speak no evil"?
Yes. Yeah.
If you don't know what
Yeah.
your coffee supply chain is that because you can't know or because you don't want to know? This is a really
That's
important
the
question,
question, right?
and
Yeah,
the answer matters hugely.
for sure.
And I personally believe that if you are buying coffee, you must know
Yeah.
where your
Yep.
coffee is coming from. And if you cannot figure that out, you should not be in the business of selling coffee.
Right.
You know, it's like if I was going to sell you a can of tuna fish, I should be able to guarantee A, that it's tuna fish, B, that it doesn't have a rusty nail in it, C, it doesn't have salmonella,
Yeah.
D, it wasn't made by slaves.
Right.
And it's the same with coffee.
Yeah.
You know, I think that we have created a system which completely broken, Andrew, completely broken. Why is it that all these smallholder farmers who are so impoverished are not counted as employees of coffee companies? They dance to the tune of those coffee companies. Coffee companies say jump, they say how high.
Yep.
Why? Because they have no bargaining power. You know, they often live in countries where literally you cannot be in a union. The number 2 coffee producing country in the world is Vietnam. Like literally, unions are not legal there. We did our investigation in China into abuses in Chinese coffee supply chains. Literally, unions are not allowed. They're not legal. So,
Can't protect the
and
worker.
that's not even counting the countries where there's so much violent union busting, like Guatemala,
Yeah.
and Mexico and Brazil, where Bolsonaro and Temer slashed the coffee unions and so many other unions. So, you know, if the farmers are basically the slaves, or in some cases, actually the slaves
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
the coffee industry, I should say farmers and farm workers,
Mm-hmm.
why is it that they aren't counted as employees? Why is it that they aren't tabulated? Why aren't you responsible for their healthcare, their pension, their social security, their protective gear? Why don't you have to take responsibility for the effluents? Why don't you have to take responsibility for the HHPs, the highly hazardous pesticides, which all wind up in the soil and in the water and in our oceans?
Mm-hmm.
I just think there's this plausible deniability where the industry has decided we don't want those people to be our employees because then we would be completely responsible for their poverty and their slavery. So we're outsourcing it and we're just calling it the free market. You know, so fair enough. That's the system that we have.
Yeah.
Now we just have to fix it. We have to ensure that those farmers have rights, that the farm workers have rights, that they are paid a living income, that
Mm-hmm.
the companies treat their effluent. I think the key is let's make sure that the industry can't say, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Yeah.
That's not an okay answer. That's like not a viable answer.
And so that's why, hence the lawsuits being brought to some of the corporations, be like, look, you may not have known, but we don't know if you actually did know and just ignored it, or you just didn't want to know and let it go. But we want you to know. We want you to make it your first priority to know what is happening at the production site and all the way through, just like McDonald's does with their fish now. Like they are very proud of it and they advertise it a lot. That I think that's so it's an interesting way of doing things. It's like, okay, we're going to bring these lawsuits because you need to know that this is wrong, and you need to find out if you're going to buy and make money off of this, like a lot of money, especially some of these companies who have really focused on creating coffees and cafes and stuff out of their fast food restaurants. And then you're going back to be like, okay, now let's start from the beginning. And if we were going to do it properly, this is how we would do it. Now, if Coffee Watch is coming into this and you want them to do it properly, you know, what's the first step? You start at the site of production, like you start at the farm. And how do you change an industry that has already taken down a lot of forests, that has already made monoculture, that has already has, you know, these slaves that are working on these farms? How do you go in and change that culture? Because I can't imagine that these are corporations in charge of this. This is probably a lot of let's just say, nasty individuals and companies that are in charge of this, that are not willing to play by the rules.
Well, so Andrew, it's really interesting to think about what has worked in the past in other industries. So you talked about slavery in seafood, which I used to work on more back in the day when I was at Greenpeace. You look at how major supermarkets like Walmart got so super involved.
Yeah.
You talked about how McDonald's got so super involved. Well, guess what? Around 60% of global coffee is bought in supermarkets.
Yeah, true.
Supermarkets figured it out for seafood. I'm sure they can figure it out for coffee.
Yeah.
McDonald's is one of the top coffee servers in the world.
Yeah.
I think that just as the industry that uses palm oil, which includes people who do shampoo and cosmetics and cup of noodles and cookies and detergent and lipstick and all these companies that use palm oil. 50% of what you leave the supermarket with is palm oil in it. A lot of companies like Unilever, etc., they figured out, how are we going to get completely traceable palm oil? How are we going to get deforestation-free palm oil? We saw deforestation for palm oil has gone down in a lot of places. We know that forced labor in palm oil was really curbed, right? We know that seafood slavery, a lot of companies have stepped up and done immense amounts of stuff to fix it. We know companies have done this kind of work before and they can do it again. These are adjacent industries. Maybe one of the closest adjacent industries is cocoa.
Yeah.
But, there are good models for going deforestation free. There are great models for going traceable. We know exactly how to do deforestation free and traceable coffee today, just like actually there are compostable pods. Compostable pods. There are billions of single-use aluminum and plastic capsules that have gone to landfills and oceans over time, but now there's compostable pods. Let's, and not from some muumuu-wearing hippy-dippy corner shop run by a mom and pop. No, Nespresso. Nespresso does. That's a major company.
Yeah, it's like owned by Nestlé, right? Nespresso.
Nespresso. It's the world's biggest coffee company. 20% of global coffee. Nestlé. So, okay. We know that we can do compostable pods. We know we can do cups for coffee that are not lined with plastic. That are made out of recycled paper and not virgin paper, and that don't go into the oceans. Yep. We know how to fix the cups. We know how to fix the pods. We know how to do deforestation free. We know how to do traceable. We even know how to think about rolling out a living income in coffee, because the cocoa industry has made so many strides in thinking through how to deliver a living income to cocoa farmers who've been typically also very impoverished in horrible conditions, much like coffee. So the bad news is things are bad. The good news is there's so many solutions. They're at the tip of our fingers, and sometimes they're even deployed by the same exact companies that are very present in coffee that are also super present in seafood, or coffee and cocoa, or coffee and soy.
So there are multiple different models of making things more sustainable, and making things more equitable, and more environmentally friendly. That's really interesting. Now, for people who drink coffee, they're probably listening to this, be like, oh my gosh, like, how do I know if my coffee falls within one of these bad category areas, or if my coffee is good? How does one figure that out? Like, if even if it has a certification on there, you're like, is this certification real? It's a lot of work for someone who just wants to have a cup of coffee. So how do coffee consumers figure this out?
Well, I have good news and bad news for coffee consumers. So let's get the bad news out of the way first, and then focus on the good. If you drink coffee regularly, you almost certainly are drinking slavery, child labor, deforestation, and ocean destruction. I'm sorry, but I think
it's a hard pill to swallow.
That's just the truth.
Yeah.
Your coffee is killing jaguars and whales. However, instead of sitting there and sobbing your eyes out, or going into some doom scrolling downward spiral of despair, you should think about yourself as a powerful, beautiful change agent. Don't sit there and self-flagellate because you've been unwittingly complicit in horrible abuses of people and planet. No, focus on all the great things that you can do now.
Mm-hmm.
That's what matters.
Because I think also, just as sorry to interrupt, but just also too, I think there's people who feel bad that this happens, like, oh, what do I do? And people who want to do it. And then there's other people who are going to argue against it. No, this certification's out. You know, like how you always hear that with an argument when somebody says, reveal something to you. I see this in oceans all the time. When we say something, oh, this is actually bad, or climate change is doing this, they'll argue against it almost as a defense mechanism to say, no, I'm not doing anything bad. It's not like, I think the big thing to say, and I always tell my eyes, it's not necessarily your fault that you're drinking coffee and you're contributing to this by drinking coffee. I don't want people to say, and I'm sure you're the same way, is that this is your fault. The reality of it is just the way the industry is built. We are bringing you information to say, hey, there's a lot of flaws in this industry and it can get better. So here's how we work it to do better, right?
That's correct. I think that's absolutely correct. So I would say, if your first stage in hearing all this is denial, like, oh, this woman is crazy, please go visit Coffee Watch. You can read all of our reports. I am telling you the absolute honest to God truth.
Mm-hmm.
Data driven. This is not a joke. I do not come from like rando weirdo groups. I've worked at some of the world's top environmental and human rights organizations.
For sure.
I graduated from Yale Law School. Everything we do gets a libel and a defamation check. I promise I'm telling you the truth.
Yeah.
Let's move from denial to anger. You feel angry about this. Okay, that's fine. Don't feel angry at yourself.
Right.
Don't feel angry at the past.
Right.
Let's move through that. Maybe the next stage is bargaining. Oh, well, I drink certified coffee. How bad can it be? Actually, bad.
Right.
Let's be really bad. Let's move through denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance to action. You drink coffee every day. That means you can change the world every day and make it a better place every day.
Oh, I like that.
Okay. Coffee can absolutely be a vehicle for saving the planet and making people's lives better. And just think about it this way. You can break it down into little steps and you can start working your way through these habits. First, don't ever get a disposable cup. Just don't do it. Either don't drink that coffee or plunk your little butt down on a chair and sit down and drink it right there for 2 or 3 minutes. It'll be nice. You can talk to someone. You can make a friend. Or bring your own
reusable mug or cup
Otherwise,
or whatever.
Just don't do it.
Yeah.
Pods. Never get a pod that is just going to wind up in our oceans. Don't do that. Please don't do that. If you love whales, don't do it. Don't get a compostable one, or again, skip it. How important can it be to you? Just know that if you do the wrong thing, you're voting to put it in a seal's tummy. And if you do the right thing, you're saving the planet. That's a powerful thing. You just made the planet a better place. You paid for something really good.
Right.
Another, organic. Chemicals, they're all connected. What goes into our bodies, what goes into the soil, what goes into rivers, what goes into oceans. Coffee is a very HHP thirsty crop. It uses a lot of highly hazardous pesticides. Don't do that. Please don't do that. Either you can buy organic coffee, which is really chemical free. Rainforest Alliance is like maybe a B-, and Fairtrade is like a B+ on chemicals.
Okay.
So those are not perfect, but they're better than nothing.
They're better. Yep.
Or you can just take a picture of yourself with your coffee cup and tweet or Facebook or Insta or whatever the company and say, I am your loyal customer. I wish you made organic. Or just ask at the counter, ask at the restaurant, ask at the cafe. Almost every chain has one organic option. Just try that.
Yep.
That's something you can do. If you can buy coffee that pays a living income, please do that. You don't have to do it every time. You don't have to do it when you're late or rushing or on the go, but stock up on that. Make a habit of it. There is coffee that pays a living income.
How do you know which one, like which brands?
Check every time. when you're buying, check. If they do it, they will say they do it. Google living income
So it's
coffee.
not just like on a certification. It says we provide livable wages for
No certification.
no certification. It just says on the package we provide livable wages for our farmers and farm workers. Okay.
And most of the companies that do that tend to be smaller mid-size, so they don't serve every geography. So depending on whether you're in Canada or the US or Europe or Japan or Korea, it'll be different.
And it might be a little harder to get than your regular grocery store. You might have to order it online or something like that.
Order it online and just make a plan. Every month, I'm going to order 1 bag, 2 bags every week, depending on how much coffee you drink.
Gotcha.
That's a huge thing. Or if you can't do that, you can donate money to a charity that works with coffee farmers. So if you're going to impoverish them by buying low-cost coffee, you can give back to their communities.
Right.
For Christmas. Or you can give it as a Christmas present to all the coffee lovers in your life.
Yeah.
And I would say, if you are someone who cares enough to just ask the barista, the manager, the waiter, the maitre d', please ask. Because every time you ask, that filters up all the way eventually to the C-suite. And the same goes with social media. Go on their social media and just tag them and say, please do better. If you want, you can go on our Coffee Watch website. We have a place where you can take lots of actions. You can sign every good petition that's out there for sustainable coffee. Petitions, it takes you 1 minute to click all those petitions, but that makes a really big difference. It makes a big difference. We have a list of the films that you can watch. You can screen them with your friends who are coffee drinkers. Just spreading the word with 5 or 10 other humans on planet Earth is a powerful thing. Hosting a screening, that's like a more fun way of doing it than sitting down and watching someone like me tell you sad bad news, maybe, if your friends are more into films. That's a great way to go. The petitions, buying from the heart, sending messages on social media, hosting screenings, asking in your coffee shop. All those things are powerful. And if you live in a democracy like Canada or the US or Europe, then please contact your lawmaker just once a year and ask them to do something. There are laws on the books that have been proposed that would totally clean up global coffee.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just a matter of like making a big stink about it to make sure our government representatives are like, oh, this is an important aspect to our people.
Here's a great example. Germany has this sustainable supply chain law called the Lieferkettengesetz. There wasn't enough popular support for it. And although many people in polls said that they loved it, a lot of really vocal negative industry captured the ear of the new chancellor. He said he wants to cancel the law. People power matters. If you're in a democracy, you can pass laws and you can protect laws. And laws are a game changer. We have a law in the books in Europe called the EUDR, one in the UK called the UKDR. In Germany, they have that supply chain law. In Canada, there's some good laws. In the US, we have the Forest Act that got bipartisan support in the House and the Senate. There are laws. You are not in North Korea.
Right.
If you're listening to this podcast, you are definitely not living in North Korea. And probably you are not living in Russia or China. And that means you are free. That's amazing. You're effing free. And if you drink coffee every day, I just ask you that once in your life or once a year, you do something for good laws to change global coffee. And if that's all you ever do, that would still be amazing. That would make you a hero for sustainable coffee.
Perfect. I love the call to action because I think this is important. I think coffee lovers, every time my wife's a coffee lover, she always wants to do better. My kids love their coffee. They want to do better. Everybody that I know, they love their coffee. They love their specific coffee, and they want to do better for the people who are growing the coffee for them. And I think this is important to be able to get out. And it's really interesting how at first if I told people, I have someone from Coffee Watch on, I have Etelle from Coffee Watch, and they're like, what? How does that have to affect the oceans? Well, it does affect the oceans because the entire supply chain, when you think about it, plastic ends up in the oceans. You have the cups, you have, the little containers, the pods, they end up in the ocean. The chemicals end up in the ocean from that, and it harms wildlife and our wild systems, whether it be on land, in freshwater, or in the marine realm, it always makes a difference. So Etelle, I want to thank you for bringing this to our attention. Really do appreciate it. Love to have you back on to get updates on where we are in the industry. But also, if people want to get a hold of you or go to your website, can you just let people know what that website is?
Yeah, absolutely. Please come to our website. That's where you can find all those wonderful petitions and things like that. It's just coffeewatch.org.
Awesome. And there is, and I'll put the other link to it as well. There is a link on there right at the top. It says actions, and that's where you can sign the petitions, you can volunteer, you can host screenings, and then you can understand how to buy more responsible coffee. So again, thank you so much, Etelle. We really appreciate it.
I'm so happy to have shared this time with you. I was so thrilled to appear with you here. And I just think that, I want to leave people with a feeling of immense hope and beauty, and that there's so much possibility for change.
Yes.
And I think we've seen it before and we can do it again.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Stay on the line and we'll chat soon. And thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Etelle, for joining me on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It was great to have you on. It was great to be able to find out all about this industry. There's a lot of stuff I had no idea what was going on, from modern slavery to monocultures and loss of biodiversity to deforestation being one of the top 7 triggers of deforestation or reasons for deforestation. It's unreal. I can't believe that's even a thing. But if you think about how many people, drink coffee and how popular it is and what the best way to go and how to find out which is the best coffee company or coffee brand or type of coffee to go with is a really difficult thing to do, just like it is for seafood. And it just kind of goes to show that it can happen in any industry, and that having that site from grow to consumption for companies to be able to see that whole supply chain is really, really important. So it's nice to see somebody like Etelle and her staff of Coffee Watch be able to work within this industry, even though it's not an industry that has a lot of attention to it, which is boggles my mind. When she first started, people weren't really paying attention to it. So I'm glad somebody is, and I'm glad there are more and more people who are doing so now. And so if you want to go to find out more about how to drink coffee better, as Etelle mentioned, go to coffeewatch.org, all one word, coffeewatch.org. And if you want to take action, I'll put the link in the show notes. You just have to go on the top menu bar over to the far right by the donate button, so you can donate as well. But right by the donate button, there's a list of actions that you can do. You can volunteer, you can sign petitions, and you can find out how to buy more responsible coffee, and of course host screenings for coffee type documentaries. So thank you so much for joining us, Etelle. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the podcast, because this is something that we always want to learn. We'll learn new things, learn how things affect the ocean, learn how things affect the planet. Deforestation is a huge trigger for planetary disaster, as well as plastic pollution in the ocean. So it's always great to be able to find out more ways that we can find solutions in an industry that would make a big difference, because there's so many people that drink coffee, and making better choices can make huge differences. So I want to thank Etelle for joining us. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube. And of course, if you're watching this on your favorite podcast app, which is the audio version, you can get a hold of me going to speakupforblue.com/contact, fill out the form, send me an email. You can also go to @HowToProtectTheOcean on Instagram. That's @HowToProtectTheOcean. Send me a DM. Love to hear from you. Other than that, thank you for joining me on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, from the True North Strong and Free. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.